Hey everyone, this is Drinks Presents Wine Online 101, a 10-part series for wineries to tackle an entirely new approach to expanding their business online. I'm Brandon Amoroso, founder and president of Electriq, a retention as a service e-commerce agency. And today we're going to go over the opportunities that wineries have with data and the power behind it when they have their own direct-to-consumer storefronts. And I'm joined today by Barry Collier, co-founder and head of R&D for Drinks. Barry, thanks for joining us. I can't think of a better person to chat through this with.
It's my pleasure.
So before we get started, can you just give everybody like a brief background on you and your role at Drinks?
Yeah, sure. So in my role as the head of R&D, my focus is really just building innovative data products, technology for selling wine through digital channels. It's a much different space than trying to sell offline. So my focus is really just driving innovation through the digital channel and selling wine.
What happens when you, like, as a winery and you're moving online, giving them access to that data? What are some of the, I guess, applications or use cases that you've seen or have been presented with through like Drinks-owned proprietary brands or otherwise?
Right. So it's really about a bit of a perspective shift, I'd say. So, our digital lives are extremely noisy. Our attention is pulled in many different directions. So, it's really important to understand that you can't retain a customer's attention if you never capture them in the first place. So it's really about not just the access to online, but understanding that you need to fight through the noise and capture their attention through personalization, through optimizations for recommendations, and that sort of focus.
Got it. And what does that look like in practice? What is like an application that a winery could think of in terms of, because coming from the retail side, you don't have the opportunity to do any of this. It's a one-size-fits-all approach for everyone, and you're sort of stuck on the shelf.
Right.
You don't have any control in that capacity.
Right. I think from the way I look at it is it's important to think a bit more like Netflix. This sort of online. They've really understood the whole concept of curation is just one piece of it. So there's the curation piece, which is making sure that you're recommending things that your customers want. But there's also the creation piece, which is once you know that, using that to make better decisions for new product launches, new labels, understanding where you're performing really well in the market, but also just importantly where you're not performing well, and then using that data to make really informed decisions on what you should be doing next.
And I think the interesting part for me, I've always thought about using the data for that individual customer, like their first and zero party data, and how to inform the post-purchase experience, but not necessarily leveraging all the data that you have on a customer level to change what the experience looks like for somebody who's net new to the brand coming onto your website for the first time. And I think that has been a really big unlock for like the clients that we serve outside of the wine industry in the Shopify ecosystem, because like on a per location basis, on a demographic basis, and so on, what someone is going to be more likely inclined to purchase than they would be otherwise.
Yeah. So you're able to leverage this sort of scale online in much more immediate fashion, right? So you can start picking up pretty anonymized and privacy focused information quickly. So once they're on the site, understanding that this is the type of product they're looking at, you kind of have a better feel of what should I be showing them from there. So not just the type of varietal, for example, but or the region, but also even the types of labels. that's really a core focus that we've had, is trying to understand not just what is inside the bottle, but also the story behind it. Again, going back to really capturing the attention of the customers, showing them labels and brands that are more likely to resonate with them, versus just showing them, if they're looking at a Cabernet, just show them any other Cabernet. There are potentially numerous types of labels and styles and themes and brands, all within that same label or region, right? So again, understanding you have to capture their attention quickly in order to retain it. So optimizing not just what's in it, but also, you know, what's on it, and making sure that you're capturing their attention so that you don't lose it.
Yeah, and I think in that like value and premium tiers, the brand and the label is more important than anything else. Like, what is the difference between one $5 Cabernet and another $5 Cabernet? It's really the perception that the customer has of it. I mean, quite literally, it could be the exact same juice. It's just what is going to elicit a response from me more so than somebody else.
Yeah, and we're all subject to it. You know, we're very visual creatures, and we make quick assumptions or you know, impulse decisions based on what we see. You know, we're not able to taste the wine, right? So we have to use all of our other senses to kind of decide whether or not this fits with what we're feeling. And again, context is important. It's not, you know, it's not to say that if I want to go out and buy, a quirky brand, that I'm always going to be buying quirky brands, right? It could just be a specific occasion, right? A specific context that I want to buy it in. But being able to quickly pick up on that. So if someone lands on a site, on your site, and their first product they look at are quirky, it's a quirky label, and then you start to see that this is sort of what they're in within this context, doesn't mean that they're always going to search for that. But in this specific session, that's what they're looking for. You can use that to then make sure that they're getting the best experience and not sitting there shuffling through hundreds of wines to try to find the one that matches what they're looking for that moment. So
how do you incorporate context and moment into like the data and the predictive power of it? Because I guess I could totally throw things off if I came to a winery's website for the first time, but I'm actually purchasing a gift for somebody else, and they're quirky and fun, but I'm not quirky and fun. I'm serious and like the old school labels. So how can you incorporate context into that?
Well, I think that's an important part, because we see that even on Amazon, where if I go to buy a gift for a birthday party or friend, for the next few weeks, I'm getting plastered with ads that are related to that same thing when it was just a one-off gift for someone. It's not relevant. So I think that's why context is actually one of the key pieces, which is you can understand, especially, trying to get away from tracking every little thing that a person does across all time. People shift and change, people have context, people have different moments, really keeping things much more contextual in the moment. What are they doing right now? What's important to them right now? Because what's important to them right now may be different from the next day or even the next hour. So it's really important to make sure that you're optimizing for that.
And I think one of the things we've done with a couple of clients, especially ones that are gifting heavy, is just ask right on the order confirmation page, like, was this a gift or not? And then, especially if it's their first purchase, and if it was a gift, then like you can immediately then prompt them to purchase for themselves, or right on the screen, or you can do it via your email and SMS communications, like, hey, thank you so much for gifting us. Here's a special offer for you to try it yourself. There's a lot of sort of logical next steps that you can use with that context and information.
Right, yeah, so you're asking, was this a gift? So you know whether or not it was something that was relevant for them moving forward, but also even the types of events, was this for, just a casual dinner? Was this for a party? Those sorts of things also matter. There's also adding additional context.
How much would you say is made up of like market research and third party data versus zero party, or do they all sort of intertwine together?
So it's a combination for sure. We've spent years doing research across not just what sells from a wine perspective, but also what really moves the needle when it comes to brands and how to associate brands. So all of that is really just internal market research that we've conducted ourselves. The rest of the data, again, one of the things that we do focus on is privacy. It's a huge thing for us. So we really try to understand how can we optimize this in a way that is focused on privacy, but also giving them the best experience possible.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense, especially given all of the recent updates and things in the news and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah, you cannot rely on that model much longer. I think it's that the writing is on the wall writ large.
Yeah. What's like, I guess, one really interesting tidbit or stat or fact that you found out of gleaning through all this data over the past couple of years? Is there one that like really stuck out to you?
Yeah, we actually, and we wrote an article about it too. It was towards the end of last year. So we were analyzing data, trying to understand the impact that COVID had from a mobility standpoint. So we took Google's mobility index. They released it after when COVID started. They started releasing publicly this anonymized mobility data. So as lockdowns occurred, you start to see mobility drop drastically, right? So it was lined up pretty perfectly with lockdowns, and then this thing started to open back up. We were curious how, if we were to take the data that we know about labels, and from that, which we haven't really talked about too much, but just as an example, we're focused on perception of labels. So what's the likelihood of a label being perceived by a human, by a customer, as being cheerful or bold or quirky or romantic? So we were curious, if we took the cheerful probability of a label, like labels that were more likely to be considered cheerful, and then lay that over mobility, where we're going to see any kind of correlation. And it was astonishing, because as lockdowns occurred, the purchase of cheerful labels dropped. It was almost in line, right? And then as the mobility increased, so the summer, things started, the wave of infection, everything started to slow down, things started to open back up, people started to buy more cheerful, right? So it was like this pattern of sort of correlation with mood of the consumer that you could actually see in the label purchase behavior too, right? And this is all accounting for all the other pieces. So accounting for varietals, accounting for seasons, it was still showing this correlation with the mood of the consumer with the purchase behavior of the labels.
How do you ascertain what makes a cheerful label versus a not cheerful label?
Yeah, that is the $1 billion question. So first of all, what we do is we ask. So we do a number of surveys, try to ascertain how consumers perceive certain labels based on specific traits. So if you were to show them multiple wines, pick the ones that are most cheerful, pick the ones that are least cheerful. And then you collect enough of that data. And then you use that in combination with how we do all of our sort of, this is where we get much more technical, where we're using artificial intelligence, machine learning, computer vision to essentially extract the labels and well over 100 features of the labels, and then using that to find patterns to say, okay, the ones that were more likely to be perceived as cheerful, they tended to have these types of characteristics. They had more vivid, bright color palettes, for example. They used fewer words. They had, basically everything from the type of font used, the types of colors used, the shapes, objects that are present, things like that. So taking all of that data that we collect for each bottle, for each wine that we sell, we can do it for any wine, actually. So we could actually take any wine, given an image, take any wine, take all of these features for those labels, and then use that to create a sort of predicted perception score for each of these traits. So the predicted perception, or the predicted cheerfulness, the predicted quirkiness, adventurous, so it's we've spent years, we filed for a patent for this back in 2015. We just got some of that granted within the last year, and we're still innovating on that. So it's just it's a constant process of innovation, learning, improving. It's just like Netflix is, they're constantly iterating on their recommendations and optimizations. Amazon's the same way, right? So it's a never-ending process, but it's one of the things that excites me. And this is where I tend to focus, which is really just building these innovative data products that are looking at things a little bit differently than just your traditional, what's in the bottle, what's the varietal, what's the region. All these things are important, but there's more to it than that. And people want to feel a certain way. They want a certain story. They want to feel a certain way with the brand. That's where I focus on trying to understand the why behind that.
I feel like phase one of that is you have, 100 SKUs, and you're showing them in a different order depending on what the data is predicting about that particular visitor. But I think it'd be really cool if you didn't have any labels and you just had Cabernet, you had Merlot, you had a bunch of varietals, juices, maybe like 50 different variations. But then you are able to dynamically render labels on the site that are going to be most likely the highest converting for that particular customer.
Yeah.
And then somehow get them automatically printed on demand at the warehouse to get it sent out. That would be you'd have thousands and thousands of brands at that point.
Yeah, no, look, it's something we've looked at fairly deeply, and we also have gone down the route of trying to understand how we can tackle that problem, because to me, again, all those things being equal when it comes to the product, to the wine itself, we're optimizing really a creative, right? So we're optimizing what we're showing, the visual to that consumer. So if you had the same wine, but everyone, if you had a wine that everyone loved, but they didn't love the label, and you were able to give them a brand and a story and a feeling that that resonates with them, while still giving them the wine that they love, it would be a great combination for sure.
Yeah, I find it fascinating that being at some of the winery trade shows, everybody, it all starts with tasting the juice and the tank samples and whatnot. I'm well, if you at least probably under the $20 tier, you at least meet the baseline requirements for taste, that's really all that you need to accomplish. More importantly is the label, but yeah, I think like as a human, you can taste the wine and you're like, oh yeah, this is good or not. And there's no need for data analysis there. But we also look at labels at these winery trade shows, and it's basically just 2 or 3 people being like, oh yeah, that looks good, or no, that doesn't look good, or this is cool, or it's not cool. There's no real process behind the creation of labels with anyone. And we have asked both like wine brand aggregators, where they're doing like hundreds of different new labels or brands per year, just testing into different markets. It's all really at random, and just, does this look good or not? There's no qualitative or quantitative process rather that they go through in the label creation process.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that is just it's ripe for innovation. It actually kind of ties into, we've been doing recommendations and that curation piece for years on Wine Insiders. We've seen, so, sort of going back to that Netflix comparison of, and it's not just about curation, but it's also about creation, which really ties into the understanding what labels to create, what brands to create. So we've been doing the recommendations and we see the lift. If they're looking at a Cabernet from a specific region, from a specific producer, if we show them other wines that essentially match those same characteristics, we measure the likelihood that they're going to actually click on that one, versus other models that we're showing where it's not really optimizing on that, it's optimizing on that plus the label itself, the brand itself, right? And we see substantial lift when we use that as the model versus just showing them another Cabernet from the same region, right? So the label we know matters, and again, especially on this price point. And every price point, once you get over a certain price point, there's much more to it than that. But it's that creation piece, and this is something, we have our Drinks Recommend product. We are really taking that and trying to build out what we call Drinks Predict, which is really more focused on the understanding what are some of the characteristics of labels and brands that you should be incorporating if you're trying to hit a specific market, a specific consumer segment. So rather than doing these consumer research or surveys, or just wishing for the best, and let's spend thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands to create a brand or a label, why not test it? So take a number of different label concepts, right? So you have your wine, you have what's going to go in the bottle. Take a number of different label concepts, run it through our computer vision sort of feature extraction for all of those concepts, and then use that to predict how that brand, that label is likely to resonate with specific targets. So if you're trying to target millennials on the East Coast, we can tell you and get a pretty good idea of like what kind of labels resonate, not just the wines, but also what kind of labels would resonate more with them. So if you're trying to target that, you should be using that data to understand what are the characteristics. Do they prefer more quirky? Are they more traditional? Do they like more unique, bold wines? What is it that is going to most likely resonate with them, rather than just hoping for the best or spending a ton of money to test all these different variants. That's where we're headed. And that's again, those are the things that kind of excite me, which is building out these things that do not exist, and they're exciting.
Yeah, and I feel like you could take that information and then choose the top 5, actually put it on your website and target people that are coming from that region, and then you could take actual sales data to the retailers there or the distributors and be like, look, we tested these 5 SKUs or 5 labels rather. This is the one that performed best. Here was the sales volume. Here was the lift. You should be carrying this in your store. I think that winery would be selling, like, I would be hard pressed to imagine that anyone has ever done that before. And if a retailer or distributor got presented with that, they'd be like, holy shit, like this is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's really taking that sort of digital culture of experimentation and testing to the next level for an industry that has not thought that way.
Yeah, and I know the talk track is that after a certain price point, it doesn't matter. But I think that is just coming from, I mean, there's definitely other things that go into it, like region and ratings and whatnot. But I think the aspect of product discovery is very much so still real. Like I didn't know about, and I always butcher the name, but like La Pergola Torte, or however you say it. It's got a crazy looking label and face on all of their bottles. It's like a cult Chianti wine that's not actually Chianti. And so the only reason I ever learned about them was because I saw them at a wine shop. I'm like, oh, this is expensive and this label looks crazy. Let me do some research on it. And then I dug into the other characteristics before actually going ahead and trying it. So I think, I mean, you can think that you might be immune to it, but you're most likely not.
I mean, I think it's, the label always matters because it conveys a message, it conveys a story, and humans are all about stories. It's the reason why any big brand becomes a big brand, because it resonates. Something about that brand's story transcends the product itself, and resonates with you as an individual, as a human. And everyone is unique. So there is plenty of room for these more traditional labels on higher end bottles, but there's clearly plenty of room also for these more quirky, unique, rebellious kinds of labels where it's like, screw you, I'll do whatever I want to put on this label because I can, and you're going to love it anyway, right? There's definitely an audience for that, right? So labels matter. Doesn't matter what price point it is, it matters.
Well, I was going to have one final question for you, which is how wineries can think beyond just the basics and leverage their data. But I think you stole that one from me with your last point about the label tester and going into retail. So this was a really, really interesting conversation. I'd argue probably the most interesting of the series thus far. I'm really excited to see how wineries can start to leverage this technology and this ability to harness these data insights to make actually informed, like looking forward business decisions, while also using it to like personalize their customer experience. I think the ones that take advantage of this are going to have a significant leg up versus the rest of the industry.
Yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. As a recap for everyone, in this session, we dove into the importance of data and how wineries can not only use it to understand their customers, test into different markets, create new labels, and really inform new label creation and what sort of markets that they are going to test and get into. So if you're interested in learning more about how Drinks is using and leveraging this data to make wine brands successful online, you can just email us at wineries@drinks.com for a meeting. And until then, stay tuned for our next session. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.